Basically, I hit bottom before I OD'd. And a lot of my friends, unfortunately, didn't make it.
Essentially, I bottomed out before I OD'd, and many of my friends didn't live through it. It was the 1980s, and Joe Walsh had already established his own legacy in the Eagles. Stevie Nicks was the mystical queen of Fleetwood Mac, wandering from stage to stage in velvet capes and platform shoes. When these two realms merged, it was intense, passionate, and ultimately self-destructive. Behind the scenes, their romance was far from magical. Joe and Stevie's affair burned hot and brief, chaotic, addictive, and full of emotional bruises. He once meant everything to her, and she pursued him like he was the last thing standing between her and death. What the public did not know was the darker side, the jealousy, the emotional manipulation, and the constant wars fueled by cocaine and shattered egos. Joe Walsh is finally opening up today, decades later, and what he does reveal isn't the fantasy fans may have hoped for. He sketches a picture of Stevie not as fairy tale princess, but as a multifaceted, demanding, and troubled woman whose private demons touched everyone she came into contact with. Stevie Nicks had referred to Joe Walsh as the great love of her life. Walsh was not that. The truth was grimmer. Their relationship descended into an addiction, marred by drug abuse and manic mood swings. Imagine this. Trashed hotel rooms after full-blown fights, all-nighters of paranoia and drug-fueled, promises broken before dawn. Stevie held on to Joe, wanting to keep him close. But Joe started realizing their love wasn't curing. It was devouring. He could not cope with her mood swings, her manipulation, and her temper tantrums. She required rescuing, but he was only just keeping his own head above the waves. And when it finished acrimoniously. There was no amicable farewell, no respect for one another. There was silence, bitterness, and a path of devastation. Joe got out, but Stevie bore that heartbreak like a wound that would not scab over. And she ensured others felt it. Also, it wasn't Joe Walsh alone who became ensnared in the seas. Whirlwind of Stevie Nicks' life. Her path was magnetic, but unstable, attracting others with charm and sorcery and burning them on the fire of her emotions. Through the years, she didn't only amass platinum awards. She amassed grudges, bruised egos, and unfinished scores. You might have heard about her long-standing feud with Chrissie Hynde of the Pretenders. What was friendly admiration between two dominant women in rock music soon deteriorated to stares as sharp as knives and colder words. Chrissie, tough and street-smart, was not buying into Stevie's mystical floating existence. She ridiculed the shawls, the veils, the drama, accusing her of living behind an engineered character. Stevie, hurt and defensive, did not back down. The atmosphere between them became frosty. Festivals were battlegrounds where the dressing rooms were put on opposite sides of the stage. I didn't know what to do. I didn't think I could ever be funny again. I didn't think I'd be able to write songs. And then there was the silent war with Belinda Carlisle. In the mid-80s, when solo stardoms equaled staying alive, Stevie had allegedly accused Belinda of copying her ethereal sound, attempting to steal the spotlight from a woman who had crafted her persona out of heartache and velvet. Rumors circulated in the industry of yelling fits backstage, of cutting stares at award shows, of interviews filled with thinly disguised insults. Both women smiled for the cameras, but the feud was written into each meeting. But the worst betrayals were not from Stevie's rivals, but from her closest companions. Her ex-backup vocalists Lori Nicks and Sharon Salini were more than backup voices behind her. They were sisters, soulmates in harmony. They traveled the world with her for years, completed each other's sentences, and rode the highs of fame and lows of storms together as one. But then the cracks began to appear. Stevie's moods turned moody, her demands incessant. One day she'd cry in their arms, the next day she'd shut them out altogether. There were whispers of battles over money, credit, and control backstage. Lori and Sharon came to resent being both caretakers and shadow. The connection broke, not in some big moment, but in 100 small betrayals that equaled silence. The kind of silence born not from hate, but heartbreak. Stevie's road through the music industry was not lined with roses. It had the corpses of destroyed friendships, tainted unions, and quarrels that would not die. And yet, as the years passed, her smile on stage never changed. But the ones who had stood behind her, alongside her, or against her had learned to adore Stevie Nicks was to make it out alive. Fans never doubted Stevie and Christine McVie were sisters in Fleetwood Mac. They were the soothing female presence in a band perpetually teetering on the brink of explosion. Two women who, outwardly at least, stood together in a tempest of male egos and stage craziness. But behind the scenes, their relationship was stormy. Imagine two queens sharing the same kingdom. Eventually, a struggle for power was inevitable. During the early 1990s, as the band broke apart under the strain of personal melodrama and musical alienation, Christine told Stevie behind closed doors that she was self-absorbed, flighty, and uncooperative to work with. She told Stevie, according to reports, that she used Fleetwood Mac as a backdrop to her own solo career, something she could take on and discard on whim. The amity that had once been present between them soured into passive aggression. Stevie conversely saw Christine as aloof, distant, and unempathetic. She was left feeling abandoned, particularly during the depths of her addiction when Christine seemed to have emotionally checked out on her. Their friendship became a chilly professional tolerance. Tension reached a boiling point during the era of albums in the mid-1990s. A projects both women secretly detested. Christine reportedly handed the band an ultimatum. If Stevie remained, she would quit. The mood was toxic. Sessions became inquisitions. Recording sessions were akin to threading a minefield. Many years later, when Christine rejoined Fleetwood Mac in 2014 after a lengthy break, most were hoping it would be for a reunion of kindred spirits, but the wounds had not yet healed. Stevie reportedly demanded complete artistic control of the tour and its course. Christine's ideas were rejected or reformatted to Stevie's taste. The equilibrium had been lost. On stage, the two smiled, laughed, and harmonized like times past. But backstage, the silence was deafening. They rode apart, slept in separate hotels, and didn't even share a dressing room. What the fans misunderstood as sisterhood was now a finely tuned illusion sustained for nostalgia and box office reasons. Their estrangement wasn't boisterous, wasn't explosive, but it was chilly, calculated, and psychologically shattering. The gradual unraveling of their friendship was one of Fleetwood Mac's most tragic subplots. An unspoken war between two women who once stood behind each other, now separated by years of pride, pain, and unforgotten betrayal. Behind the scenes, Stevie Nicks' life was a mess of emotional weights, pending tensions, and unspoken heartaches. Hailing from a strict and image-conscious family, Stevie's rebellion was etched in eyeliner, leather boots, and a microphone. But that rebellion came at a price, particularly with her father, Jess Nicks. A successful entrepreneur, Jess was a man who believed in discipline, structure, and conventional roles. Seeing his daughter become a mystical rock icon filled him with disapproval. He didn't get why she needed music for chaos for freedom, and he never kept it a secret. Their fight was the stuff of family legend. Jess frequently judged her professional decisions, how she looked, and how she would not get married. When Stevie dived into drug addiction in the 1980s, Jess stood emotionally apart. He perceived it as weakness rather than pain. The only times he attempted to involve himself were more like control than empathy. Stevie felt hurt and angry and drove him away. Her mother, Barbara, was kinder more tolerant, yet she too grappled with her daughter's fame. Barbara craved a quiet existence for Stevie, not the tour of concerts, affairs, scandals, and broken sleep. Though she stood up for her daughter against their critics, she could never quite understand the burden Stevie bore. Stevie, for her part, yearned for approval that never materialized. During holidays, the room would tense up when she came in. Relatives were left speechless in front of the glamorous star, who resembled nothing like the little girl she remembered. The isolation further increased when Stevie had to make a personal choice that would define her for the rest of her life. In the late 1970s, while having her on-and-off affair with Don Henley, she got pregnant. She was afraid that being a mother would stifle her career or be impossible in the life she led, so she decided to undergo an abortion. She never recovered emotionally. In interviews years later, she acknowledged the decision haunted her, that she had speculated about what could have been. To the public, Stevie was a tough, independent woman, but to herself, she mourned the children she did not have, the family she was not close to, and the love she never quite attained. Her fame became both a defense and a cage. She constructed walls of platinum records and stage lights. But within those walls, a woman longingly yearned to be connected. Her family, all the while with the glamour that labeled her, never did know how to support the actual Stevie, not the one with the scarves and makeup. And perhaps that is the reason, even in her prime, she seemed forever to be a girl struggling to prove herself to the folks who never quite trusted she could succeed on her own terms. Of all the hot chapters of Stevie Nicks' life, none smoldered hotter than the one involving her feud with Lindsey Buckingham. Consider it Fleetwood Mac's eternal curse. Two soulmates engaged in an artistic dance that was magical yet maddening. On stage, their chemistry was undeniable. But behind the curtain, it was decades of emotional battles, betrayal, and open wounds that never healed. It started in the late 1960s when the two aspiring musicians were all they had ever dreamed of becoming apart from fame. They were together every step of the way, creatively connected, and ascending the ladder of the rock world together. But the further they went into the business, the more their emotional equilibrium dissolved. When Fleetwood Mac reached its commercial pinnacle in the mid-1970s, Stevie and Lindsey's relationship had already dissolved. But still, they had to play night after night, inches from each other on stage, singing songs rife with coded bitterness and heartache. Every lyric was a weapon. Every harmony concealed an argument. Their performances were less musical and more psychological theater. Lindsey begrudged Stevie's increasing solo success in the 1980s, and their power struggle escalated. He felt neglected. She blamed him for cruelty, crushing her spirit. He blamed her for leaving the band for ego. Friends described the backstage tension as intolerable. Recording sessions would conclude with slamming doors, walkouts, or tears. Then there was that so-called 2018 split. Though the official narrative was sketchy, the reality was so much more acrid. Stevie was said to feel disrespected by Lindsey during a show in tribute to Fleetwood Mac. From people close to the band, she demanded an ultimatum, either him or her. Management chose Stevie. Lindsey was axed. The aftermath was a media storm. There were lawsuits. Accusations were hurled like knives. Lindsey declared he was blindsided. Stevie declared she had had enough. The band broke apart, old sores torn violently open. And for many listeners, the fantasy of ever witnessing the entire original lineup come together again died within that moment. Their tale was a tragedy dressed up in gold records and standing ovations. It was lovely, nasty, and indelible, just as Stevie herself was. But even years after